So welcome everyone to the Obligations of Memory podcast. I'm Jeffrey Geisner, founder of the Jewish Culture and Holocaust Remembrance Group. And I'm honored to have Dr. Michael Mantell and Paula Mantell with me today for our podcast interview. And let me give you a little quick background on both of them. Michael has his PhD and he earned it from the University of Pennsylvania. He got his master's degree at Hahnemann Medical College. He also has been the chief psychologist for Children's Hospital in San Diego, and he created and led the psychological services program for the San Diego Police. Well, and Paula is teaming right up there with Michael. So she's a certified fitness instructor. She primarily works with seniors in the home, and she has been a long career of teaching Spanish and French in high school and junior high school. Volunteers currently on many numerous community event programs, and in the synagogue. They together have 2 sons and amazing 6 grandchildren. So welcome to the podcast, and we'll get started because I want to know a little bit about both of your sides of your parents, maybe your grandparents, and you can take it away from there.
Well, okay, I guess with that open question, first of all, it's an honor that you have included us in one of the early episodes of this wonderful podcast. We really appreciate that. And I appreciate working with you, knowing you and communicating back and forth as we do. So I'll tell you about my parents and my grandparents. My mother and father came from a wonderful family. Each of their families were wonderful in their own right. My father, we lived in a 4-family home in Newark, New Jersey. In that home, we had my parents, obviously, my grandparents, my aunt and uncle, and cousins. And so we were very family focused. And if anyone grew up in the 50s on the East Coast, you knew that Sundays were a time when you sat in the alley and you had barbecues and you chatted away. I was also from very early on, I think 7, 8 years old, working in my father's shoe stores in Newark and learning quite a lot about taking care of people and giving to people in diverse neighborhoods and all that. My father was politically active, and I learned a lot about life from watching him in his work in politics. Wonderful picture of my father, my brother, and myself. We were very, very young, and he was working for Senator Estes Kefauver back then, who was running for president. And so that was a big influence. And going to shul, going to the Wainwright Street shul, the Orthodox shul. Although they weren't quite Orthodox, but we went to an Orthodox shul. And my mother was probably the best psychotherapist I ever knew. She was not a therapist. She didn't go to college, but she talked to me early on about, she used to say in Yiddish, Michael, it's einreden. You're talking it into yourself. What do you care what they think? And so forth. And to this day, that's exactly the way I practice my coaching and the way I did practice psychotherapy for 45 plus years, helping people understand you disturb yourself by the way you think. Stop talking it into yourself. My mother's parents, they were also in the shoe repair business. My grandmother used to come to our house every week, and it was just one very, very close, positive family. I couldn't imagine a better upbringing. Very, very positive about it all.
Okay, and let's switch to Paula. Go ahead.
So my father's parents came from Russia, and they were more culinarily, culturally inclined in terms of their observance, but every Jewish holiday, we always were there. Grandma Ida always was a very good cook, and making things that I thought everybody ate, like fricassee, like that was like a household word, but evidently not everybody. And And she really was a wonderful, wonderful cook. She was a very strong woman and very determined. And they had a very successful business in Belleville, New Jersey. In fact, my grandfather had gotten the first liquor license, I guess, after the whole Prohibition era that was issued in that town. And they also had a supermarket. My mother's parents were an interesting amalgam because my mother's father was observant. I mean, he put on like tefillin, as the saying goes, every single morning. He had a beautiful voice. He was constantly singing Jewish songs. And in those days in the Catskill Mountains at the resorts, they would have men's choirs that would come for all the Jewish holidays. People would go and stay, and he would be part of the men's choir. My grandmother, on the other hand, did what she did out of love. And like when they were staying with us, when our parents would go away, my grandmother would say, shh, and she would sneak butter into my baked potato when we were having hamburgers or lamb chops or something. So, but they really loved each other very, very much. And in that regard, it shows you what someone will do for love of another. So that was, you know, an interesting thing. My parents kind of were traditional, but they certainly were not in the observant fold. And it was with Michael and me when we were married that we started making changes and started learning and doing everything. Like we were very much in it. And that was a wonderful time for our children to see that example from us. And it did harken back to my maternal grandfather, which was really an interesting thing.
So I have to ask you, for Passover, who did your seders, Paula? Did your father or did your grandfather take over the seder?
Well, and it was interesting because, again, as I said before, it was our paternal grandparents with whom we did the Sidurim and the seders. And, you know, we did everything. And I guess we did it in English and, you know, the Maxwell House Haggadah. And we did it that way. And probably was my father who did lead it, though.
How long was your seder?
How long was it? Not too long.
Jeffrey, we did our seders. We used to joke to the tune of the William Tell Overture. Okay, let's eat.
Oh, it's so funny that you said that because I have this thing about my father. My mother was from Košice, Czechoslovakia, with deeply Orthodox and religious. She was, unfortunately, family was deported to Auschwitz. She survived, but my father escaped Nazi Germany at only 15. So when Passover came, my mother wanted to observe, do the chametz with the feather and all this, but that was all compromised out by my father, uninterested. So my father, I always said, my father would say, "Broch atah Adonai, let's eat."
Right, exactly. The
Right.
William
Very
Tell
similar
Overture.
to your William Tell Overture.
My mother came from Poland with her family when she was a very young little girl. And
So it didn't have anything to do with the wars. They'd left before the war.
they left before the war. Yeah.
How did they? What year was that? Do you know?
I don't know. But we belonged to a conservative synagogue growing up. Rabbi Joachim Prince, who was a very, very well-known rabbi. And my mother adored him. She thought he was the epitome of what Judaism was. On my father's side, we used to go to this Orthodox shul, and my grandfather would leave early and take me home. And he would, like on Yom Kippur, he would sneak some of the kreplach at lunchtime. Don't tell anybody. You can have a piece of kreplach. Don't worry. I'll have with you.
So on Yom Kippur, which synagogue did you go to? Your mother's or your father's?
Well, it depended. We went to both probably. Went to both, but yeah, I went to a conservative Hebrew school, and you actually didn't.
I just went to Sunday school. So that was it, beginning and end of the Jewish
You were
education.
bar mitzvah as well?
Michael was.
Yeah, okay, but you were too early for bar mitzvahs, bas mitzvahs at the time.
Well, no, I didn't, right, because of having left. And it was as an adult that I learned Hebrew. I learned how to pray. 38 years old was like the year when all of that started to happen.
And I was in a Tifereth Israel synagogue here in San Diego,
Conservative.
where we were very, very, very active. And then we were time to send our kids to school here in San Diego. We sent our oldest one to kindergarten, public school. And one day he came home and he said, they're making fun of me, because he used to dress very nicely. It was very important to us to send him to school. The kids were teasing him. And a friend of ours said, you should consider the San Diego Hebrew Day School. And well,
we did that. And I didn't realize at the time quite a grilling I got from Rabbi Simcha Weiser, the headmaster. And he was inquiring about my lineage and my grandparents, country of origin, that sort of thing. And then I later found out the other thing I did when I met him was shook his hand. Did not realize you don't do that with observant gentlemen. So I learned later on.
Well, I wanted to ask you, I'll start off by telling you, it was funny because you talked about your mother not having any psychological degrees. I always thought my mother had a postdoctorate degree in Jewish guilt. So, so I'm going to ask you to give us a story that you remember about growing up in your families that had an impact in the future of your lives.
well, one story that I like to share a lot is I was about, I don't know, 3 years old, maybe 4. And I only spoke Yiddish until I went to public school, until I was in kindergarten. And I was having my tonsils out at St. Michael's Hospital in Newark, New Jersey. And I was terrified of the nuns with the big things that they wore. But remember, this was in the 1950 something, early 50s. And I was in a crib with a big cross on the top, and I was just so scared. And I said to the nun, "Ich will's the Teppele Wasser." And the nun comes running out to grab my mother, and she said, "He's speaking in tongue. I don't know what he's saying." Oh, I love that story because it really speaks to how important it is that we take into consideration the differences of people and be sensitive to those differences. But my mother was the ultimate psychotherapist from a cognitive behavioral understanding that we make ourselves upset. Other people do not make us upset. Don't waste your time doing that to yourself.
Yeah,
and she stood up for that in many, many ways.
My sister-in-law has this term, just you're occupying too much space in my head.
Yes, without paying rent.
What about you? What are your memories about what influenced you from?
It's interesting when you say this because my grandfather, my mother's father, used to say, "Beatty, you've got to send them to Hebrew school. You've got to give them a Jewish education." My mother would say, Pa, don't worry about it. And it's ironic because when I was at Montclair State University, I was given my core classes Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday. And I'm like, this isn't going to work. And I went to see, for religious reasons, I claimed at the time, and I went to see the dean of students and I told him, I'm Jewish and this goes against my faith and I need to switch into the Monday, Wednesday, Friday core classes. And he did it. And I did switch. And then unbeknownst to everybody, how Hashem or God plays with us and moves us on a chessboard. When we became religious, Saturday definitely was a day that I was not riding in a car, turning on a light switch. And I can imagine up in Shemayim in heaven, my grandfather saying to my mother, "See, Beatty, I told you so."
Right.
So that's something that I kind of get a chuckle and.
So you've been married for how long? A long time, right?
Yeah.
Over 50 years.
That's mazel tov. So let
Thank
me
you.
ask you, take it all the way back. How did you meet each other?
Great story.
Funny you should ask. On the way to first period English, Michael being a senior and I was a sophomore. And it was interesting
In high
because
school or
high school,
Okay.
West Orange Mountain High. And we both had English, although his was senior, mine was sophomore. And I stepped on the back of his shoe and he turned around. Yeah, and he tripped.
Literally tripped forward. And I turned around. I was a friend of mine, Johnny, and I looked back. I looked at Paula.
First, he looked really miffed.
And I looked back at Paula, and I said to and Johnny said, "Come on, she's a sophomore. Let's go." I said, "Wait a minute. I'm going to marry her." And to God, I'm telling you the truth. I said, "I'm going to marry her." That was January 26th, 1966. And then a number of years later, we married, and here we are.
Okay, you met in high school, then you separated in college, right? So how did you reconnect?
We never disconnected.
From that date in 1966, we remained together. I never dated. I went on a few dates before I met Michael, but that was it. And
we went steady. Then I gave her a pin. That was part of the
first
deal.
the lavalier.
It was a whole thing in the 60s.
Yeah,
that's what you did. Yeah. And then in my grandmother's home, in July
of 1969, it was the day of the moon landing.
That's when I gave Paula the ring.
How did you ask Paula's father for her hand?
Of course, absolutely.
Was there anything about that was memorable?
No, I remember once borrowing her mother's car, and we were going on a date, and we got into a little bit of an accident. And her father said, he took my hand and he said, "Michael, do me a favor. Don't borrow Mrs. Krause's car ever again." I said, "Okay, I'll tell you what."
He took it well.
He took it very well. And I said, "I won't borrow the car, but I'd like to marry your daughter." And he said, "Mazel tov."
That's a very nice story. So I'm from Allentown, Pennsylvania originally, so I know the area that you're talking about. How did you decide to get all the way across 3,000 miles into San Diego, and when did it happen?
Climate.
Well, so I had finished at University of Pennsylvania with my PhD and got a job as a chief psychologist at a child guidance clinic in Philadelphia. And we have family here in San Diego, cousins. And I don't remember how it came out that we were invited to come for a week vacation. And Paula loved California, always wanted to be here, the climate. And so we're going to go for a 1-week vacation. Literally, Jeff, this is what happened. We're with these cousins, and we're at a restaurant waiting in line to go in. And I heard someone say something, they mentioned the word psychologist. And I turned around, I said, "Oh, nice to meet you. I just got my PhD in psychology." And he said, "Oh, what are you doing?" And I said, "We're here on vacation. I got a new job starting when I go back next week." He said, "Well, there's a job here as chief psychologist for Children's Hospital and assistant clinical professor at the University of California, San Diego Medical School. Are you interested?" Well, Paula kicked me so hard, I think she broke my ankle. And I said, "I think we're interested." And I called and extended the trip home 1 week, interviewed, another week, interviewed, went home. And when did we come out here?
The very beginning, mid-September, right before the high holidays, Rosh Hashanah of that year, 1970.
And you had family, but you didn't know anybody else, obviously.
No, I had the job offer. And the Tuesday after Labor Day, or whatever it was, I don't remember now. We got in the car, packed our stuff up, drove out here, knew nobody but cousins, and went to work. And that was it. Never moved back. And the irony is that our kids were born here, but they live back east now.
So let's talk about your children a second. So how old are they?
And 44 and 40, well, 43 and 45. Or
no, 43 and 44, something like that.
Yeah, they're approaching, that age, like
early 40s.
42 and 44. Let's settle on that.
So let me ask you to project. We just went through and said, okay, your parents gave you something, you described it. What do you feel that you gave your two children? If I asked your two children right now, what would what I call the mirror test. I would look in the mirror, they give it back to me. What would they be saying that you provided them?
I think we've given them an enormously strong sense of family. Number one, nothing is more important than family. That's number one. I think we've given them as well a deep sense of faith, trust, faith in God. It's and a respect for diversity of all kinds of people without judgment. I think we've helped them understand whether you go to shul or synagogue or temple, whatever you do, whether you eat this kosher, you don't. What's more important is knowing that ultimately you are Jewish and families first. I think we've given them a deep sense of taking care of their own children, a work ethic that is sterling. What else do you think?
They also know that come whatever may, we always have their backs. They can always turn to us for anything, whatever they may ever need. So that's a big thing. And I think that has provided a strong example for both of them. And they've said that to us, because of what we learned from you, that's what we are doing for our own children, to always be there for them, sit with them, listen to them, support them. And they know that we always will do that for them as well.
So do they follow your footsteps in the service world? Like what are their professions?
One is an attorney, and he just became a judge in New York, but he's also an actor. He loves acting, and he's been in quite a number of things. And he's married to an attorney. They have 3 children, one of whom is in Israel right now in her gap year. They graduated high school, Frisch High School in New Jersey. And the other son is the COO of a real estate consulting and water management company in New York City. Very interesting company that they have.
Interesting combination.
Yeah.
Real estate and water management.
Right, exactly. Yeah, very interesting.
So let's go back and bring your book in here. And the link is What You Think.
Yes.
What was the impetus for you to write that book? Where does it kind of come in at the right time in your life that you sort of decided that you would write it? I know Paula has been a big supporter, so you had to talk to her about this book.
Of course, she named the book. The name of that book is Paula's title. So I'll tell you real quickly. In 1988, I got an idea. I was writing for the San Diego Jewish Times every week, way back then. Gary Rosenberg, rest in peace, and writing and giving Divrei Torah for synagogues and all that. And one day, the concept of don't sweat. My mother used to say all the time, Michael, stop sweating it. Don't worry about it. What do you care? Don't worry about it. It doesn't matter. That was her philosophy. So I came up with this idea to write a book in 1988. I had just given a lecture to the San Diego Police Department, and I called it Don't Sweat the Small Stuff. P.S. It's all small stuff. And Bill Collender, then the chief of police, rest in peace, said that he thought that was terrific and everyone loved it, and said to me, yeah, you ought to write a book. Bill, I don't have time to write a book, but I made time. And I collected a lot of articles that were in the San Diego Jewish publications. And 1988 came out with Don't Sweat the Small Stuff. P.S. It's all small stuff. I was flying back to New York once a week because I was working at Good Morning America back then.
Oh, really?
And yeah, always been in the media. And so
your role at Good Morning America was a psychological.
Yeah, I used to come in
on for the
different stories like, yeah, I can give you a whole story about that. But in any case, it won all kinds of awards and so forth and so on. And it went to 3 printings. In 1994, it went out of print. I was walking through Fashion Valley shopping mall here in San Diego, and there used to be a bookstore called Barnes & Noble. I'm not sure there are any bookstores like that anymore. But yeah, but floor to ceiling in the window, there was a book, Don't Sweat the Small Stuff, and it's all small stuff. And I look and I said, oh my God, the book is back in print. And I called Paula and I said, you're not going to believe this. The book is back. You're going to be able to have a kitchen you want, joking around. And then I look and I read, wait a minute. My book was PS, it's all small stuff. This is and it's all small stuff. And I look again. Who is this other author? Carlson. Wait a minute. Well, that opened up a whole series of emotional reactions and so forth. I used to hear my mother in my back of my mind go, stop talking into yourself. It doesn't matter. So what? What do you care what they? And we talked about it. I wrote another book about violence in the workplace, here and there. But I wanted to write a book about this experience. And that's when Paula named it.
The link is what you think.
So that book was a collection of all my daily 5 things I put on Facebook every day for 6-7 years. And the concept is simple. We don't get upset. No one makes us angry. We do that to ourselves by the way we think about events, people, and places. Change your thoughts, you change your whole life. You don't like the way you're upsetting, you feel upset, angry, disturbed, you don't want to be disturbed, change what you think. Become more unconditionally accepting of life. And so that was the book, The Link is What You Think.
So Paul,
And,
I've got to ask you, Paul,
Yeah.
is he giving you a line of baloney here? I mean, or how
No.
do you live with a guy who's constantly,
Go ahead, tell it.
Okay.
constantly
It's
up,
it's
up? I've never met
Lily?
someone who is so charged to live his life every day as Michael is. So help me. Well, what's the ever-ready battery that you're driving this thing with?
it's totally the life, the living, the walk, and the talk, every aspect of it. And I'll run something by him. And again, I can see like the wheels working. I'm like, okay, I know what you're going to say. Right now, I'm disturbing myself about something or someone. And again, and he helps me with this to redirect it, refocus, and put it in the context of it's what I'm infusing in my own head.
How do you fight?
What?
How do you fight with each other?
Fight?
How do you fight with each other? If he's always in your head.
Well, no, I mean, he's always with, we're very together all the time. So, but it's not even a question of fighting. I'll raise something and I'll say, which is how even with our children, I was, you said this or you did this, and I'd like you to change that. I wasn't happy with that or whatever. And it's learning not to raise voices and not to be angry. That's not going to get the job done. And to express, this is what I was thinking when you said that. It kind of did that, or I felt that way. And again, it was my own thinking.
So
And,
do you link what you think back on him? So when he's giving it to you, do you kind of give it to him?
no, I don't, because he's right.
He's ahead of
And
you?
again, you apply it, you work it, and you see, yeah, I was doing that. So
Very interesting. Very interesting, Michael. So now we're getting close to the end. I want to really bring us back into the Torah. You've been writing a Parsha for as long as I know you. I met you through the San Diego Jewish World a few years ago. We came to San Diego in 2019 to retire. And it's been amazing the amount of education that you've gathered through the Torah. So I'd like to start there with the how did you do it? And then what you gained from it by writing, and what the reaction of your readership is.
Well, I began at San Diego Hebrew Day School. There was a Rabbi, Benjamin Ginsburg, who I will give credit to, who invited us to a Shabbaton one Shabbos. This is before we were observant.
We didn't even know what it entailed to keep Shabbat
And so we said, yeah, we'll go. And if we don't like it, we may, leave and go shopping or something.
on Saturday.
And so we went and we really got turned on by the whole thing. We really liked it. He took me on a trip to New York and he took me to a yeshiva to visit some very esteemed rabbis. And the more I got into it, the more I really thought there really is a connection between what I see in Torah and what I see in psychology. It's called the Musar movement. How do we improve ourselves through Torah and Judaism? And that's what was the magnet for me, and I think for both of us. So we decided to get an apartment for Shabbat every week at the Beth Jacobs synagogue here in San Diego. I became the gabbai for almost 20 years there. And then,
if you can explain gabbai to
yes, I was going to do that. That's the person who calls everyone to the Torah, who organizes the services, who makes sure that everything is in place where it needs to be for the services to move forward. The MC of the services, if you will, not to replace the rabbi, but yeah. And I became president of the San Diego Hebrew Day School. We were co-chair of the Super Sunday for United Jewish Federation, and a whole host of events like that. So we really became steeped in it. And then, and I started giving these Divrei Torah, these weekly talks about Torah and psychology, and looked for what's the human growth lesson in the Parsha each week, because there always is something. And that's how I started to do it.
This goes back how many years?
Back in the early 80s, late 70s, early 80s.
Wow.
Yeah.
In late 80s, yeah.
And I mean, and it's been going steadily since then.
And so that's the how-to. So what do you take out of it?
Well,
a lot of work into it.
A lot of work every week. I mean, I don't miss a week, obviously, please God. We're now members of Young Israel of San Diego, and also of Adat Yeshurun here in La Jolla, 2 Orthodox synagogues. And what do I take out of it? I mean, I always look for some deeper lesson that I can bring to my clients. If they're not Jewish, I don't necessarily say this is from Torah. If they are Jewish, I like to bring that kind of spirituality, because I believe that spirituality, excuse me, just take a drink. Sorry. I believe spirituality is an element of emotional well-being. Doesn't mean religiosity, but a sense of that there's something bigger than me in this world. And I look for that in each week's Torah reading.
But each year you started the cycle all over again. So
Right.
How do you not repeat what you remember from the prior year?
That's I guess that's an ethic that I learned from my parents. Maybe I don't know.
There is always something different, and reading it a year later, maybe even having gone through COVID as we all have for the last 2 years, I think it brings a different lens each year when you go back to that same Torah portion.
I look at what I've written in years past, and I'll say, like, that was interesting then, but now I see this. I never noticed that before. I've read this thing 50 times. I've never noticed that sentence. It was, for example, it was a prayer that we say, I think it's Psalm 33. And I've read it thousands of times. I've never noticed, it never leaped off the page. And in shul a couple of weeks ago, it jumped off that God takes care of us in a certain way. And I made sure to include that in the Parsha, in the weekly Parsha.
And so the reaction from your audience because you're publishing it on San Diego Jewish World. I know I'm publishing your work inside of my group with the Jewish Culture and Holocaust Remembrance, and it's getting reactions there. So how are you impacted by the people reading it, and what comes back to you?
Well, I get a lot of wow. And I say that with all humility and humble. People write back like, wow, like, how do you have time to write this every week? That I hear a lot. And then people will write to me and say, this particular sentence touched me. I really needed this particular insight this week. So I do hear that from people, and I always invite more of that.
And people have said to me, you know, what Michael said this past week really, really resonated with me. I felt like he was talking to me.
Nice.
So that is a really big thing. The other thing is people will be out and about and people will approach him that we don't even know their names. And they'll say, you know, what you write every week really is meaningful. And I really, really enjoy reading it.
So I'm gonna end this by saying, okay, you've went through 2 years of COVID. I have actually 2 questions on there. What did the Torah say about COVID that you have pulled out and provided? That's the first question. Second question is, when was the last time you were able to get to New York and see your children and
I'll
grandchildren?
answer the second question first. We just came back from New York yesterday.
Nice.
We've been there. We were celebrating Paula's birthday and Mother's Day.
Well, happy birthday. When's your birthday?
It was May 4th, last Wednesday, 72.
Okay, I'm
Years.
putting it in my calendar now.
There you go. Okay.
Okay, thank you.
So we were there before that in when?
Oh,
Earlier
December.
in December as well. Okay, now COVID. I believe what the Torah teaches us is essentially to have bitachon and emunah, faith and trust that there's a reason for everything. Nothing happens to you. With God's help, it always happens for you. And COVID was an opportunity to either learn to cower or learn to respond with strength, and to learn to care for other people and to care for yourself, and to put into perspective ultimately what's most important. And what's most important in the Torah is that we take care of our bodies, we take care of ourselves. And I think that's a lesson that COVID just leaped out from as my learning through Torah.
And since you read all his work, what was your?
She reads it, she corrects it.
She edits you, right?
It's rarely necessary. Rarely.
And what is your takeaway of his Torah for COVID?
Of what he has said, and again, believing that nevertheless, even if some horrible things have happened, but to try and pull out like a thread of something that you can hold on to, positivity and belief that God is here to take care of all of us. May not be the way we thought it would be, but it's the way, believing in God, that is best for us. And
Michael, I can't stop this. I have to now ask the third follow-up question.
Right.
okay.
So how do you apply someone who has lost a child?
Yeah.
How do you, and I know this is directly the kind of work that you do, and help and support people who have this devastating events happen to themselves. How do you work, and they're Jewish, how would you work the Torah into something like that? Because someone who's seeing this and hearing this probably has had a defining, devastating event in their lifetime. And so the link is what you think, which is your book. How does this all come together for that person?
Well, I'll give you this answer. I was sitting, I was waiting, I was working for Good Morning America. I was waiting to go on one day, many years ago. And I was in the green room waiting to go on. And Charlie Gibson and what's the woman's name? I forgot now.
Not Sullivan.
Whatever it is.
June London.
Joan London were interviewing the mother of the young boy, 18-year-old soldier in Israel who was killed by the Palestinians, tortured and killed. And please forgive me, I forgot his name.
Nachshon Waxman.
Paul remembers my driver's license number, credit card numbers, you name it, and that's it. Nachshon Waxman. Should rest in peace. And I had to go on right after that. Charlie Gibson said to me, and we kept the mother on, Dr. Mantell, and this wasn't Torah, this was psychology. Dr. Mantell, how do you explain what's happening? Here is this woman sitting there with her head covered, Gomorrah's behind her, all like that, all behind her. How do you explain what happened? Her answer was the following. He said, everyone prayed. She said, yes, we all prayed. We prayed and prayed and prayed that our son should be okay. And God heard our prayers. But God's answer was no. And we accept that that's his answer because he knows better. And so what I help people understand, I'm giving a address to a group in town here in San Diego next week, a suicide prevention group, parents who lost kids to suicide. It's become rampant. Mental health needs of kids today are astronomical. They can't get help. There are more kids in ERs than in doctors' offices. And that's my message, that we have to trust that we don't always get what we want. That ultimately the Torah tells us God is in charge. I'm not in charge. And that healthy people, people who can function at their best, not happy about it, obviously, but the belief that our child is soaring to the highest levels of heaven, and that their neshama, their soul, has an aliyah, and that they're sitting right alongside of God. How else can you think about this? Can we walk around angry? That doesn't help us today. They're up there in heaven, basking in the delight of God's presence. And we're going to be angry about that. We're angry because we don't have that person with us. That's happened to our parents at relatively young ages. Yeah. And it's a change. It's the link is what you think. Now, people can criticize for saying that. Oh, you're happy? No, no one's happy. But we have trust and faith that God knows best. And when the mother of this young son, who was tortured and killed by the Palestinians, said, we prayed, but God's answer was no. Charlie Gibson looked at me, and in the break, he said, how can she do that? I said, because she has faith in God, Charlie.
That is a perfect place for the Obligations of Memory podcast to end it with the both of you. I am so honored that you brought your insights, your intellect, your beautiful hearts to the program. So thank you so much.
Thank you very, very much, Jeffrey.